from the beginning, you talk a lot about how everything is an iceberg. And,
That's right.
I know this concept applies not just to, an 80-20 in a specific part of sales, but I'd love for you to kind of elaborate on the metaphor. What made you choose an iceberg here, and what's kind of the inspiration behind this whole theme?
Yeah. So for years, I've had icebergs in my lessons, in my decks when I talk and I speak, but I never made it the front and center. It was always around, how are we going to become better salespeople? Well, we're going to become better salespeople by really understanding everything. And I put an iceberg up. And then as I started to kind of go on the adventure of writing this book and exploring, what's something that we could all grab on really quickly. The book's a short read, it's fun, there's a lot of stories. It was built that way because me personally, I have a tough time reading for a long period of time. I need to get a piece of information and then go and go and go, and stories help. So it's like there's a lot of people probably like me in sales where, gosh, just don't make it heady, make it fun. So before I know it, I learned something. And as I was writing it, I was like, wow, if I could just get people to remember one thing, that everything is an iceberg and we only see, 20%, 10% above the surface. If we could start to figure out how to look below it and remind ourselves of that and start to see our spouse as an iceberg, our kids, our parents, could we start to have stronger, better relationships? And gosh, who doesn't want that? And if the world could start to have better and better relationships, well, I think more things become possible. And as we see other places of commonality underneath the iceberg and understanding, we don't necessarily need to agree. We just need to understand. We can build relationships. We can make the world a better place. So it's like I'm going to call it iceberg selling, and it was so that people just really remember that. And the fun part was this summer when I finished the book, I was actually in northern Canada in a little town called Churchill with my youngest son, just the two of us. And we were looking for polar bears, and we saw polar bears, and there's icebergs up there, right? And so it was kind of befitting that at the end of when I finished this book, I was on vacation there. I was in the Arctic, and so to me, it's just a simple way to remember it. And then folding within it, I created some best practices that I think are pretty logical and easy to follow. But if you just walk away knowing that, gosh, what if I could see underneath the water? What would my life be like? What would this relationship be like? Then, to your point, we're kind of selling with love. We're figuring out things. So that was the inspiration.
I love it. And if I grasp myself on some of the concepts you share about, and if you're doing any kind of sales interaction, and obviously we're investigating, right? We're trying to find out what are the real problems. And what you see, which is going to be like the 10% of the iceberg, are going to be the things that people kind of tell you at the surface, which I find that if we want to really get to build that rapport and see that we understand that client, we have to be able to see what's underground. That's where most of the information is. But I think we're naturally guarded. There's this
Mhm.
duality, right? It's like, oh my God, I
Yes.
want to have more genuine conversations. I want to have more genuine connections, but I don't want to share anything that's too vulnerable of me. And so as a salesperson, how do you earn the right to be able to get to that level where you're having conversations that are beyond just the surface?
I'm so glad you asked that because to me, when I say everything is an iceberg, we are too, as salespeople, as human beings. And so I also think what's great about salespeople is in general, we're pretty confident. Now, when we have our heart to hearts, when we're having a beer with our friends, we might be like, gosh, someone's going to find out I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. But you really do. You really do. If you've even sold for a year or two, you know what you're doing. You understand the mechanics, and you have to have some comments because unlike any other job, we put ourselves out there every single day. So I guess I'd encourage you that you're already used to putting yourself out there. And a lot of people in sales are very independent. That's why we did it. We're independent. We want to make our own future. We want to bet on ourselves. So this is my bridge to answering your question. The more authentic you can be with yourself, the more you can bring that to the conversation. Like even at the first, hey, I'm glad you called. I just got back from lunch and I had a really nice time with my wife, and we kind of talked about what it was like to have kids in high school right now. Like, he just said that in the beginning of my sales call? Yeah, because I'm a real human being and that's what just showed up for me. And guess what? Most likely that other person's going to be like, oh, wow, that's really nice. That's a great idea. I should maybe do that too. And now we've already begun at a place that's with trust and rapport instead of having to like gamify this. How are we going to figure this out? How am I going to win? It's like, I'm not going to win. I'm going to connect. I'm going to be of service. I'm going to figure this stuff out. So I think to me, if you really want to understand somebody else's iceberg, start sharing some of yours. and be authentic and be a little vulnerable. And you're gonna see some amazing things happen. That's been my experience.
I want to throw something at this because I've had some conversations with others who felt that when you build rapport and you connect on things that might be outside of the scope of the product and the solution that you want to bring is actually taking you further away from your objective of creating a transaction. I see here this has worked for you. Have you had some pushback around this theory of people saying like we should be sticking to the point and just making transactions happen because now we're wasting time?
Yes, I have. I can think of one. I think there's a mindset that hasn't doesn't know what this means yet. So they haven't had this reality. So they're like, I'm doing fine. I'm hitting my numbers. Why do I need to change? Right? Okay. Well, then I'm gonna probably ask some questions like, well, are you happy? Do you feel connected? Well, I'm making the money. Yeah, but do you like your job? And maybe they say yes. It's not a one size fits all, but I guess what I would say there's sometimes there's a lack of awareness that there's even a new reality. I will tell you also one of the things that I've consulted on for years is building sales engines, and I'll go into like the SMB, the small mid market, and many of the times when people talk sales, they're only talking bottom of the funnel. Like, I want a lead that's ready to buy, and this is what I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to give them this and feature and benefit, and then I'm going to give them this, and then at the end, if they're excited, I'm going to give them a deal they can't walk away from, and that's how we close. Okay, fine. But I got to tell you, the sales starts way before then. One of my other books is called Sales and Marketing Alignment, and it's really the concept of like, what is this entire buyer's journey, and how do I meet them along the way? And I think the more authentic your brand shows up, the more authentic your people show up, your messaging, it's going to be more of a magnet. You might not win everything, but if you're inauthentic, it can push people away. So I think it's kind of this whole, what are you playing for? Are you just playing for like churn, 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 churn? Or are you playing for something that's a lot more solid? And so that's usually the conversation. And sometimes it's hard because somebody's writing checks, they're investing, and they're like, I just need more sales. It's like, okay, let's take a step back and start exploring all that. But for me, it's a kind of a quality quantity play. Like the more quality sales we have, the higher lifetime value, the more impact we have, the more we're changing things. I want that in my business. So that's kind of my point of view on that.
Yeah. It's so funny because I speak about, there's some techniques that do exist that are quite, let's call them aggressive for the sake of just calling it something everybody would understand what it is. Aggressive sales tactics. And you might get a close rate that goes from like 5% to 7%. Great. A couple dollars come in. But the 95% of the people that didn't buy right away with your previous technique might end up buying in a much higher likelihood, maybe an increase by 50% because you actually treated them with respect, authenticity, and you didn't kind of alienate them with the scarcity or the aggressiveness. And yeah, you got the extra 2% on the front end, but all of that long-term value in brand building, it's like, okay, you've extracted the egg from the goose by sticking your hand inside the goose and ripping it out. Great. Now
Right.
the goose is pretty traumatized and not so willing to produce more eggs.
Would it be all right if I told a really quick story about this?
Please.
So I go into this company, and I'm going to kind of make it brief, but there is this woman that was there who was selling pretty okay. There's 5 people on the sales team. But when I came in to kind of become a fractional leader, the current guy was like, we need to let her go. You're going to find that we need to fire this person. I said, okay, well, I appreciate that. But I want to learn why you said that, and I'm going to spend some time with this person before I make any rash judgments. So I start to investigate the whole sales organization, what's going on, our sales ethos. And this woman says, the way we're supposed to sell is a 25-minute appointment. And we're supposed to consultative sell. I need at least 45 minutes. I go deep, I ask a lot of questions. And if I could just sell my way, I know my close rate would be a lot higher, a lot higher. I said, okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's role play. Like, tell me current state and what you wish. And we did that. I was like, I'm going to believe you. You're the eyes and ears. You know what's right for you. And yeah, if we could put a little bit more time in instead of like trying to book up as many appointments we could per person, what will happen? Will the sales close rate as the team rise? Will it be the right move? So I kind of asked for some permission, a little bit of forgiveness. And I go, you've got a month and I'm going to back you no matter what. And I want you to sell your way. Well, the story is we ended up following her lead, changed the whole way the organization sold, didn't just make 25-minute appointments. And I would say 80% of the months, she was the top performer and they were going to let her go. And so the story is, she was putting her heart and soul in. She really wanted to bond with this person, understand and guide them, where the other people were much more transactional. That was the culture I'd come into. And then we switched much more to listing, spending time, kind of this iceberg. That was probably like iceberg V 1.2375 or some crazy thing like that, right? But I think a lot of it's just like, if you're not sure, then run a pilot, try something different, compare the numbers. They're not going to lie. And in this case, we ended up with a much happier sales team and more revenue, and a lot of good things happen.
Thank you so much for listening to the Selling with Love podcast. We have some previous episodes you can tune into right here. And if you prefer the short form content where you get to the point in under 10 minutes, we do have a ton of clips from our best episodes that are being shared on this channel as well. So pick which one supports you the most. And of course, thank you for liking, subscribing, and of course, selling with love.